Hi, I'm Ruchen. I also go by Huck. I'm a PhD student at the Colorado School of Mines. I'm going to present this work, Teacher, Teammate, Subordinate, Friend, Generating Norm Violation Responses Grounded in Role-Based Relational Norms, done by me, Zhao, and Tom Williams. People naturally perceive robots as moral agents and expect robots to be good. This requires robots to have moral competence to avoid negatively impacting human moral ecosystems. Muller and Schultz argue that, to enable moral competence in social robots, robots need a system of moral norms as a moral core, and the ability to use those norms for moral cognition, decision-making, and communication. Due to this focus on norms, recent approaches to achieving robotic moral competence have mostly relied on norm-based ethical theories such as deontology. However, HR researchers have argued that our community needs to go beyond these ethical theories that are currently being used and embrace a wider diversity of moral philosophies from different global cultures. Moreover, through this lens of ethical pluralism, it is important not only to consider different cultures' ethical frames separately, but also to create robots that simultaneously leverage multiple ethical theories as part of their moral reasoning processes. Recent HRI research seeking to embody an approach that has explored what robotic moral competence might look like through this lens of an Eastern ethical tradition, Confucian role ethics, which argues that moral norms and virtues are derived from social roles and relationships. Compared to the norm-based ethics, role ethics emphasize the needs for communicating role obligations and explaining moral reasoning to help others cultivate their moral selves. Role ethics also emphasize the tension between moral and social norms. These perspectives motivate a role-based approach to moral communication, especially when responding to norm violations such as command rejections. However, to the best of our knowledge, there has been no prior computational work grounded in role-theoretic approach. Thus, in this work, we are looking at two key questions. How can moral reasoning and communication grounded in role ethics be realized in interactive robotic systems? And how does reasoning and communication practically received by humans? To address the first question, let's first define a role ethics theoretic approach to robotic moral competence. Building on definitions of moral competence, a Confucian role ethics moral competence would require a role-based moral core, role-sensitive mechanisms for using the moral core for moral reasoning and decision-making, and also the ability to communicate about the reasoning and decision-making on role-based grounds. As the foundation, the role-based moral core requires representations of the relations that hold between humans and robots in the robot's environment, and the roles actors play in those relationships. A possibly normative way of specifying the action viewed as benevolent for those roles, and language and concepts that can be used to communicate about those roles and relationships. We represent social relationships as a graph, with a set of vertices and a set of edges. The vertices denote the moral actors known to the robot, and each edge between vertices represents relationship known to hold between two agents. Each edge is labeled with a relational role set, while each element denotes a pair of relational roles that hold between two agents. Our relationship representations take this form, while AI and AJ denote the two agents with that relationship. Role I and role J denote the roles that agent AI and AJ play in this relationship. Using these representations, we can define our role-based relational norms. From the role ethics theoretic perspective, we introduce a role-based design schema with 4 elements: an action, including who is the actor and who is the patient; a context in which the role norm holds; a relationship precondition between the actor and the patient; a deontic operator indicating that the action is obligatory, permissible, or forbidden. Thus, a role-based relational norm can be represented as an expression in this form. We can now represent a norm. A teacher should not give a student answers while the student is taking an exam using this form. To reason whether an action is forbidden or not, we design an algorithm which takes an action, a knowledge base, and a norm base, and returns a possibly empty subset of norm from the norm base that matches these three conditions. 1. They have the deontic operator forbidden. 2. Their action match the input action. And 3. Their context and relationship predicates, when bounded with the values from the input action, are true in the knowledge base. The role-based design schema holds the information needed not only to perform role-based moral reasoning, but also to generate role-based responses to norm violations. In this study, we examine 4 types of non-compliance explanation. Action explanation, which provides only the action permissibility with no other information. Contextual explanation, which provides both the action permissibility and relevant contextual information. Role explanation, which provides both the action permissibility and relevant role information. Context for role explanation, which provides the action permissibility, relevant contextual and role information. We encoded our norm representations in Prolog to perform the role-based reasoning and convert the result to these 4 types of responses through a template-based text realization system. To assess the effectiveness of these explanation strategies across relational contexts, we created 16 video stimuli filmed in 4 different relational contexts: the office, the exam room, the machine shop, and the conference room. In each video, a human gives a robot a role norm-violating command, and the robot responds using one of the 4 explanation strategies. Our experiment used the 4x4 within subject design with Greco-Latin square counterbalancing. After providing informed consent and demographic information, each participant watched 4 videos with different relational contexts and different explanation strategies. After each video, they answered a questionnaire regarding trust, understanding competence, and perceived intelligence. Our results suggest that providing role or context information is helpful in promoting trust, confidence, and perceived intelligence. Moreover, our results suggest that different types of information are helpful in different relational contexts. For example, for a robot in a subordinate role, providing role information is especially helpful. For robots in a teacher role, providing context information is especially helpful. For a robot in a teammate role, providing role information or context information is equally helpful. Upon further inspection, the effectiveness of different types of explanations is actually dependent on nuanced mental modeling of human interlocutors. We believe some of our findings were due to differences in norm violation severity. The teammate and friend conditions did show similar patterns, but in the teammate condition, action explanations performed much more poorly on most measures. This could be because the norm violation in the friend condition, hiding information from another person, has a different level of severity than the norm violation in the teammate condition, which is taking another person's box. Second, in the subordinate condition, people seem to prefer a robot to use role information. This could be because the specific context information communicated that the robot was in the workplace was not convincing. Without knowing that the patient of the action was the robot's supervisor, the listener may have had no reason to suspect that the action was impermissible. This suggests robot must reason about causal relationship between role norms' contextual antecedents. Third, in the teacher condition, people seem to prefer robots to use context information the student is taking an exam. This could be because people find the specific role information the robot is a teacher to be unconvincing. This suggests a similar tension where communicating some role obligations by themselves out of specific context may be unhelpful. Thanks for your attention. I'm happy to take any question you have.